Well, the first 100 days of the Trump administration winding down, and the president has left the country in a daze. We're going to take a look at what he's done and what he hasn't. Also, the president, he's pushing for Republicans to do something when it comes to health care, but would that be an unhealthy move for the GOP? Then Oprah Winfrey has a new movie that is premiering on HBO this weekend. Well, our own Mike Gilliam sat down with Oprah to hear all about it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for spending part of your Friday night with us. And we begin tonight, where else but in Washington. Well, today we learned that next week will be a huge week with tremendously important week, big-time legislation that will be bigger than anything we've ever seen before, except if it doesn't happen, it's not that important because 100, well, that's just an arbitrary number. Confusing? Well, you're not alone. Let me try and explain. Today, the president told us we better get our popcorn ready because next week would be historically busy. As early as Wednesday, we were told he's going to unveil tax reform that he promises will give both business and individuals, quote, massive tax cuts so big, he says, they'll be, quote, bigger than any tax cut ever. But the Donald didn't stop there. Despite the disastrous failed repeal and replace of Obamacare last month, today he promised that next week his party would roll out the 2.0 version with completely different results. Oh, by the way, did I mention the government might shut down a week from today? I'll get back to that. So, what you might ask, is the president trying to get more accomplished next week than he did in his first embarrassingly inept 3 months? Well, that would be because his first 100 days conclude at the end of next week. This morning, he tweeted that the 100-day standard was, his words, ridiculous. Now, while self-serving, that standard ignores one little problem. That problem is his own words.
Think about what we can accomplish in the first 100 days of a Trump administration. In the first 100 days, just think about what we can accomplish in the first 100 days.
Truth is, Trump breached his so-called 100-day contract with the American voter. Now, on the first page of this so-called contract, he promised 6 measures to clean up the corruption and special interest influence. That pregnant pause was to keep me from laughing. I must have missed those congressional term limits that he promised, or banning influence peddlers. I'm sorry, did somebody say Michael Flynn? He also promised repealing Obamacare, funding the wall along the border with Mexican money, withdrawing from NAFTA, reversing the Iran nuke deal, enacting the travel ban, school choice for all, launching a major infrastructure initiative, and enacting that historic tax reform. Now, other than putting Gorsuch on the court, he didn't deliver on one of the aforementioned promises. So now, it's a combination of never mind and just wait. Which brings us to next week. The latest version of Trump Care 2.0, which Andrew will detail in a few minutes, is impossibly worse than the last fiasco that couldn't even get out of the Republican-controlled House. And this leads to the Trump tax plan. By his own words and the party's mandate, if he doesn't get the savings from health care, he can't get his tax cuts. Which, by the way, helps guys in his own tax bracket far more than the middle-class Americans he hustled last fall. But his math problems, they do not end there. Now, remember the part about Mexico paying for the wall? Well, you were right if you thought that that was utter nonsense. Today, Trump is insisting in this spending bill that Congress fund the wall. A bill, by the way, that if not passed, will lead to a government shutdown a week from today. Now, for a president and a party who control all the lever of government, it's a bizarre threat reminiscent of that great line from Mel Brooks' classic Blazing Saddles.
Hold it. The next man makes a move, the gets it.
Hold it, man. He's not bluffing. Listen to him, man. He's just crazy enough to do it.
If you haven't figured it out, the guy was holding a gun to his own head. If Republicans follow through on this threat of a shutdown, and recent history says don't put it past them, it would be the first time in American history that a single party would have presided over shuttering government. That's an artful way of saying No one's ever been this stupid before. Which brings me full circle and back to yet another broken promise from the then candidate Trump about the scope and the ease of how he'd make America great again.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning. You may get bored with winning. You're going to get so sick and tired of winning.
Next week, I have a feeling, as we grade his first 100 days, our fatigue of winning will be the least of our problems. And for more on what's going on at the White House, I'm joined by ABC News political analyst Matthew Dowd. He's also author of a new book, A New Way, Embracing the Paradox as We Lead and Serve. I want to get to your book. One quick question. What do you think if next Friday there's a greater likelihood that we have a health care, actually something that passes through the House here, or that we run out of money?
I think there's a higher likelihood that we run out of money because we're probably already have run out of the money. So if I would pick one or the other, we're going to run out of money next Friday instead of health care.
Well, a lot of that really comes down to where we find ourselves in your book. You address this, that this ends justify the means mentality has really spawned such a hyper-partisan, I think you call it tribalized way in Washington. It's percolated, it's gotten to this point here. Do you see a way outside of, as you say in your book, of getting outside of a two-party system that we can kind of break this fever?
Sure, I'm actually really optimistic. I know it's a disruptive, and anxiety-ridden time, but we've faced these times before, 70 or 80 years ago, 70, 80 years before that, and it really requires a new brand of leadership of people willing to put country over party and do what is in the best interest of the common good instead of the parts of society. And so, though we're tribalized and it's very unhealthy for our democracy, there is a path forward, and I think it's going to be led locally and at the community level, and then Washington will follow that lead.
I'm curious, is there a mechanism in Washington, to your eyes now, that there is a consequence if there's such a nakedly partisan? I think of Devin Nunes and how he was leading the Intelligence Committee and what he did and didn't do, and specifically cooperating with the White House when he was really charged with investigating them. Yes, he had to step down, but do you think enough folks on Capitol Hill say, if it comes across and it really doesn't pass the smell test, I'm going to pay a price?
Well, I think the problem is that they're now it's like a dodgeball game where everybody lines up at the back of the wall and nobody's willing to come to the center because they feel they're going to be pelted by it. And so, as of right now, both political parties are solidified with their base, and so I don't think they've paid a price yet. But I think they're going to pay a price as the American public looks more and more and more at this system. Either they're going to pay a price within their own party, Republicans and Democrats, or this new system is going to arise, independents running on their own without the barriers and without the gatekeepers of the two political parties. And that's going to force I think that's going to force people to get to a place where, as I said, they can get to a decisions made in the common good. We have these huge issues facing us, but neither side's willing to come to the table and solve them.
You know, you've mentioned in your book that we've been at this spot before after highly charged and divisive times in America, and you also said earlier you're optimistic. What, if anything, can we draw from those previous times where, as you say, politicians will put country before party?
Well, I think what we can draw through is the people that are going to lead this change, again, and they did it before, back 80 years ago, they did it before that, 80 years ago before that, are entrepreneurs and artists and creative people, people that are willing to look at something innovatively. We've seen it arise in the hotel industry with Airbnb and taxi industry and all of these industries that people thought were solid and they couldn't change. Our politics and our governance is the last thing that seems to have been innovated. And so I'm very optimistic that there's enough people out there that want to change this. And before, institutions failed us before, and then we reformed them or recreated or created new ones. And I think that we're in that moment, and I think enough people are frustrated on all stripes that they're going to actually step forward and do it.
Well, I put the question to you here as not only an observer, but somebody who's been inside the arena of politics. Would you want to put yourself literally on the front lines to be a candidate given the climate that we're in? Or is it just so at times distasteful that you'd rather do what you're doing right now? And I think the answer kind of could speak a little bit to why it's so hard for people to want to get into something that's got an approval rating sometimes in single digits.
Well, I think all of us have to figure out how we get in the arena, and there's different ways to get in the arena, right? There's how different we use our voices. You use your voice, other people out there use their voices in whatever they're doing in their communities. I've thought about running before in my life. It didn't fit in the moment. I think about running today in what I might want to do. I just don't know. I'm trying to figure out what's authentic to myself. I'm not afraid of the system. I've fought in the system on both sides of the aisle. It's not for lack of courage that I would get in the system, but I want to do, like everybody else out there should do, which is what is the authentic way for you to advocate for change and be a voice in the system. And running for office is one. Starting an entrepreneurial exercise to solve a local problem is another. Speaking on the media is another. So all of us have to figure out, how do we use our voice?
Well, I think we can all agree that we need a new way, and that is the book. Matthew Dowd, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for your time.
Coming up next, everybody, President Trump, he's pushing again for that health care deal, but will that wind up backfiring and causing a big political problem for Republicans? We'll have that right after this.